It's not? Okay. Is it now? Okay. Thank you. Okay. So our session objectives is we're going to define executive functioning. Many of you in here may know what executive functioning is because you might be clinical practitioners, but many of you might not. And so we're going to define that. We're going to also talk about how it manifests itself or the characteristics in some certain disabilities. We're going to review some research to kind of make an argument about why we need to look for executive functioning within EAAT. And then we're going to discuss some specific activities that we do within the barn and while we're riding where we should be looking for executive functioning skills. This is more of a concept or a perspective discussion. So we haven't done any research. We'd love to do some research on executive functioning ourselves, but this is more about what's been done and then looking at it, executive functioning in the perspective of EAAT, okay?
So when we think about executive functioning, it exists on a continuum. And if you're like me, when you're learning about a disorder, it manifests itself in myself all the time. I walk to the refrigerator and I do not remember why I walked to the refrigerator. Things happen and I don't understand what the person's context was of saying that. I don't always get jokes. Those are all executive functioning type problems. So, but it's a neurocognitive process that we don't always pay attention to in our writing. And it's a specific set of things and problem solving that we need to attain a future goal. So the functions such as planning, we see lots of students who have difficulty with planning, with their working memory, with their impulse control, with their inhibition or self-control, and this shifting set or flexibility is huge in our industry too, and with this population. If you think of a student that represents these definitions of executive functioning and these difficulties, kind of keep that student in mind as we go through this, because it'll help you think about it. So this is just one of the definitions. There are many of those definitions, but this is just one of them. So the initiation and the monitoring of action is part of this. Yes. Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and talk about it a little bit about shifting set or flexibility. So a student comes in to your barn, for example, and they think that they are going to ride Pal today. That is the horse that they were told they were going to ride today, and they have a preconceived notion of that they're going to ride Pal today. Pal is not available to be ridden for a variety of different reasons. So their set has to shift that they're going to ride Pal, or they have a blue helmet in mind that they always use every week, and the blue helmet is not available because the buckle broke on it. They have to shift their set. That is problematic for people with executive functioning disorders, and you see that all the time, and you need to understand what you can do to help that person process through a shifting set. Okay. This is my favorite topic of all times. I am such a brain nerd, and we could have a whole dissertation or class on this particular topic. It is wide open. It's been my love of the whole industry. It is so wonderful to see what we're able to know now about the brain and the neurocognitive processes. So we think about the frontal lobe being that control of the inhibitions, and working with students with TBI throughout the years, I've seen, very prime examples of that, but it's not just the prefrontal lobe. It is all connected in those pathways, and what we're learning about the bilateral connections of the brain and making neural pathways are what we have to see happen. It doesn't just happen in isolation. So the motor planning is very much connected to the prefrontal lobe, and we're learning more and more about that, and we'll get into that study just a little bit more. But I think it's very important as a speech-language pathologist to understand why, as clinicians, you hear the first word that the child ever says on the horse. Why does that happen? Because you're getting deep brain input, okay? So if we know this works, we really have to delve into why are we hearing that first word on the horse. I've heard it so many times, and it's emotional to think about when I've heard walk on for the first time on the horse. And I'm a speech-language pathologist, and it's my best tool. It is my very best tool to have that person on the horse. There's nothing in a clinical setting that replicates that, even being in the barn. So I'm looking for more and more reasons of why that happens, why those neural pathways and executive functioning kids operate in our barn great. They are successful in our barn, and we take them, we put them back in the classroom, and they fail. What is it about what we do as professionals that they succeed in our barn? So we're going to kind of flesh that out a little bit as we go along. So fun.
So as Shelley mentioned when we looked at that definition page, there are many, many definitions of executive functioning. Many psychologists kind of create their own, but they all do agree that there's three main areas. And then under those, they kind of define them as they want to. So we're going to talk about the three main areas. So, and we're going to have some examples of those next. So we have attention shifting. That's that flexible, that's the shifting of set, okay? And this is where they need to, Shelley gave some very good examples of, their horse is not available, okay? And then we're going to talk about a memory, short-term memory, what we call working memory. So what you as a therapeutic riding instructor have just told them to do, an instruction or a command. And then their inhibitory control. So that's their self-regulation. That's being able to wait. It's being able to stop an action when you ask them to, stop. And all of these three areas make up executive functioning. So attention shifting. This is, and I want to talk a little bit about executive functioning is tested. I have it later in my notes, but I'm going to talk about it right now. This has nothing to do with the barn. It has nothing to do with a natural environment. This is how executive functioning is tested, okay? And there's much controversy about how we test for or assess executive functioning, okay? So this is, you'll hear us use other terms such as cognitive flexibility, mental flexibility, mental set shifting. You hear all different, like we said, it's defined differently depending on what psychiatrist you're looking or psychologist you're looking at. So this is an example. It's called the card sorting task. And so first you might be sorting by color, and then you might be sorting by shape, and then you might be sorting by color by shape. And so this is where you can very fast, they do it by, did it take 4 seconds, for them to put it in the right category? How many did they get right? How many did they get wrong? Okay. But that's the example. This is how it's assessed. There's others that are very similar, but this is a real common one. Okay, so what numbers were just on the board? Y'all are great. Y'all have good working memory. Okay, so, yeah. So what were the words? Okay, y'all got about 3 of them. That's pretty good because I didn't leave them up there very long. What if I had been talking while y'all had been reading? And I wasn't saying those words, I was just talking.
Now remember, keep your heels down. remember, turn right.
Right.
So think about that. Think about the interference you're giving with working memory, if you're giving any, while you're asking a student to perform a task. So really think about that working memory and what you can do to enhance that in a situation versus what interference can be. Because interference with working memory with students who have executive functioning difficulties already is huge. So talk less. Give the student time to process. Talk less.
And remind your sidewalkers to talk less. So you can think of this perspective of looking at executive functioning as a rationale and a reason for asking your sidewalkers to talk less as you are practicing to talk less. Okay, so you can say, and you can have a code. I suggest, EF, okay, and then they're going to go, oh, executive functioning, I'm talking too much. Okay, so have some kind of code that, instead of please be quiet, so let the child show their executive functioning. When we talk too much and the sidewalkers talk too much and repeat 5 or 6 times what the writing instructor just said, we don't know if they have any working memory. We don't know if they have any planning. We don't know if they have any self-control. Okay? So letting the writer show you their executive functioning, especially their memory. Okay? We rush to help them. Yes?
Will the motion of the horse interfere with that? Or does it help? They're walking or trotting. Does it interfere with where they're thinking they should go to next?
Okay, so she asked if the gait of the horse might interfere with, okay, so actually I'm going to show you some research that says the activity of the horse, physical activity, actually helps executive functioning and should help them. Such as Shelley had mentioned, that's why we hear their first word. It also helps them organize their thoughts. It helps them be more flexible, okay, and shift change. Okay, shifting their set. And so actually the movement of the horse is beneficial. Yes?
What's the difference between the memory that you tell them to do something and they have to remember to do it, as in what I'm trying to work on right now is a student that cause and effect. Steer your horse, you get an immediate response that I'm going right, I turned right, wow. It's a wow moment.
Right.
And instead of me saying, turn your horse to the right, use your right rein, and end up at the blue barrel. That if you have them actually do the process, that they remember it better. Is there a difference in the executive functioning?
That depends on the student. So you have to be diagnostic and prescriptive as you go through that. So you have to evaluate where your student is with their working memory. So yes, there is a difference, but you have to know where that working memory is for that particular student. So you may have to change depending on where that student is at that moment too. And it can change throughout the session. So the answer is yes, it depends. Okay.
And also you just gave us 3-step command.
Right.
Okay, can your student handle a 3-step command? They might forget the last step. They might actually turn and use their right rein, but then they forgot which barrel they're going to. So, but you need to wait to make sure that they forgot what barrel they were supposed to go to. That's what I'm saying, is that we talk too much. Red barrel, red barrel, red barrel. And so you don't know what their working memory is. Okay, does that help a little bit? Okay, great. Great.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Oh, yeah. Pass those out. Yeah, we like giveaways. Are you?
Yeah.
Is that you? No, that's me. I'm
That's you.
sorry.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. So, and so inhibitory control, that's self-control, that's, waiting their turn and things like that. So we have a go, no-go task, and in some of the research that I'll be going through very quickly, that's very similar to many of the tests that they do. So it's like a child or a writer or a person has to categorize something very fast. So it depends on how fast they can do it. So if they have a cat and a dog, they have to decide whether it's a cat and a dog, or a dog, or whatever. Or is this a car or truck? Okay, so and then they have to put it in the right category. And so it depends on how many they get right and wrong, and also how fast they can do it. Okay, so that's like a go, no-go task. So does it go somewhere or not go somewhere? Okay, so the Wesley Says is what they use in the scientific clinical research is what it's called, but Simon Says is the same thing, So Simon says to, walk on or walk on, So that's inhibitory control, because they hear that walk on and can they wait till Simon says to do it, okay? And then we're all very familiar with the Stroop task. So many of y'all have seen where first you're supposed to say the word, and then you're supposed to say what color the word is, okay? And so these are all examples of inhibitory control, okay? But you can see where the Stroop task it can't be generalized to the real world, So many of these assessments are not very practical.
So I have to say this because I work in neuropsychology.
There you
so
go, great.
I just really need to say this.
You can.
Anything that she's saying about a specific test, please don't go tell your clients how to do it.
No.
Because if you guys tell your clients how we're going to do the testing, it ruins the test.
Right.
And they could potentially get like a false negative because they know how the test works. So I have to say it just because it's my field.
Thank you. So thank you. I would not do these tests. Okay, I myself would not do the go, no, go task. It's usually done on a computer. You need a psychologist or a neuroscientist to do this. Okay, so I'm not going to do these tests. Okay, but I'm just saying that this is how executive functioning is done in a clinical setting and how they assess it. Okay, so this is about you recognizing and helping children and writers with their executive functioning. That's what this is about. Okay, but these are examples on how, so you understand what it is. Okay, don't go do these tests. Thank you for pointing that out.
Or like tell your kids how to do it.
Yeah.
I've definitely been in this situation where one of my kids has been referred for testing, and they're like, oh, what should we expect? And our normal, like you were saying, we want to help people, so we're like, yeah, let me kind of tell you a little bit about it, but we just want to make sure that the tests are valid so
Right.
that we get accurate.
Right. So very good point. We don't teach them the test. Okay, we don't teach the test. That's not what we're doing, so thank you. So thank you for pointing that out. And I'm not putting these tests down either. I'm just saying they're very clinical based, and we are not doing these in the writing arena. This is all about learning about what executive functioning is and how to look for it. Thank you.
Okay, so when we think about executive functioning deficits in children on the autism spectrum and with attention deficit, one piece that I think is often left out is that motor skills piece, that actual motor planning. I see that a lot with my students, and it's very misunderstood piece of the puzzle. I had a student who was very high functioning autism on the spectrum that could not get into bed. He literally dove into bed at night. The motor planning, he was exhausted at night. There was so much interference with that. So that motor planning piece is often misunderstood of you didn't understand the direction. There are huge deficits in motor planning with some of these students. I've been in class where my student just falls out of the desk. Just sitting in a desk and falls out of it. So take that piece in mind when you're teaching and think about the motor memory that you have and what you can do to enhance motor memory. Executive functioning, the inattention, the inhibition, we've talked a lot about that, the working memory, the flexibility, the inability to shift and set, but it's not always consistent either. So you have pieces. I have pieces in my life too that I am very accustomed. I get up and I have a cup of coffee first thing in the morning every morning. Every morning, and it is very troubling to me to check into a hotel and there is not a coffee pot sitting there. So that is a piece for our students. They have huge pieces where that shift and set, they're asked to shift all the time so we can think about things to do. So social skills, why are you accepted at the barn? Why is this become your thing where you are part of the team? I have heard this over and over again. This is the one place my kid belongs. This is the one place that they're successful. They can't go play soccer. They're not doing Little League. Why are they so accepted here? And it's because we overtly teach those skills of how to read your horse. So when a student can learn to read a horse, who is a very honest representation of emotion, we can transfer that skill to learn to read people too. Look, your horse likes you. He comes to you. What can you do in your life to make your teacher like you too? So I think overtly thinking and cognitively processing what we can do to shift those social skills is a great conversation for us to think about and to have. And why we know what is working in the barn, why is it working, and what can we do to transfer that and actually think about why that happens and why we're successful in a lot of what we do. How do you switch slides? Thank you. Okay, so executive functioning and the theory of mindset. So I think it's very important to think about students who are on the autism spectrum disorder in particular, who we determine to be egocentric in nature. So we think about that they cannot put themselves in another person's position, okay? Why is that? Why can they not read those emotions? And what does that mean for you in your life? So, excuse me, sorry. They may not be able to anticipate what people feel. I find I use a therapy dog too in my practice, and I find that my students can learn to read my dog and my horse way before they can learn to read my emotion. So I think fleshing that all out and looking at that is extremely important. My son doesn't call his grandmother once a week to check in with her. And recently, she told me that she was very upset that he had forgotten about her since he had gotten married. Colton never calls me. He never checks in with me anymore. Well, he had a shift in life change, and he didn't get the rule, I'm supposed to call and check in with my grandmother once a week. So all I had to do was call and say, Colton, on Thursday, set an alarm, and if you haven't talked to your grandmother, call her. He had a shift in life. It didn't transfer that he should keep calling his grandmother because his life shifted. He set an alarm on his phone. He calls his grandmother. His grandmother is happy. He had no clue, none, that she was upset and that he should still be checking in with her. And he's very high-level functioning, but he really missed that piece of, I haven't talked to my grandmother in 2 weeks. I should check in with her. So we have to think about those type of high-level examples, and it's important to kind of think about that too.
I know you can't read this on your slide, but I'm going to go through it quickly because these are just some more examples of deficits that you'll see in children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder or ADHD. So they have trouble activating or initiating because they have organization issues. And so what you might see, some signs of that are procrastination. You look at it as they're procrastinating, but actually they just can't organize and they don't have self-initiation. So Focus is the next column. So we know that children with ADHD have trouble sustaining focus. They may, something may grab their attention, but then they get distracted. So, so we have to look for ways to help them stay focused. Okay, horses help with that. Okay, they also have, because of their lack of focus, they might have trouble with transitioning. And then some children with ADHD overfocus. Okay, so then that's that rigidity that we need to shift their set. So what are some of the ways we can do that? The third column is effort. So they have trouble sustaining a task, regulating their alertness. So they'll be drowsy 1 minute or daydreaming, or then they're alert, and then they're just all over the place. So we may see drowsiness, very slow to complete a task, and then they're very slow in their response time. So they're very hyper, but it may take them a while to process that, organize that, plan their response, and then show that response. Their emotions, they can get highly frustrated, and they can be up and down and up and down and up and down. So we look for moodiness. They have temper outbursts. They can be argumentative. Okay, that usually comes from frustration. Memory, so we know that they don't have very good working memory. Some of them lack that. And we look at it as recall. So we're always asking them to recall, which brush do you start with, So we have to be patient with that and have those reminders, have it on the wall, and then, can you go check which one do you start with? So we see that they don't remember our facts, what brush do you start with? And they're always losing items, okay? So they might not put them back in the grooming bucket, so they might just leave them somewhere. And then action is the last column. So they don't have good self-monitoring skills. They don't understand that they're getting too excited, or that they're super hyper at that moment. So they don't monitor their emotions very much and regulate those. So they look very impulsive, and many of them do not have good social judgment. Okay, and we've talked about that already, not really knowing other people's perspectives. So this slide is basically the biological versus the environmental, okay? So executive functioning, lack of or deficits in executive functioning skills can be biological. It can be handed down. You can inherit that. So what we are as therapeutic riding instructors, we want to provide the environment to help support executive functioning skills. So many children get frustrated. They can lose motivation because they've failed time and time again. One of the reasons, Shelley says, oh, they do so well in the barn. They are successful here. That's our goal, okay? That positive environment so they can work on their social skills, their executive functioning skills, and all of those other skills. So I'm going to go through the research. I'm going to try to go through it very quickly so that we have quite some time to talk about putting this to practice. So we're going to talk about physical activity and executive functioning. Then we're going to talk about some specific disabilities and executive functioning. And then we have a few studies that actually look at EAAT and executive functioning. I'll spend a little bit more time on those, but I want to go through the others fairly quickly. Okay. So we have 3 studies here that I'm going to review that look at executive functioning and physical activity or exercise. So the first study, adults with Down syndrome. This one had a control group, so 10 that was an exercise group, 10 in the control group, so 20 adults with Down syndrome. They exercised by walking on a treadmill for 20 minutes, and they did a knock-tap game. And then the results showed improvement in cognitive performance and inhibition. So they were able to better replicate and have less errors in the knock-tap game, done by the experimenter. So, and it improved their inhibition, so they were better able to follow. The second one, 181 children, 10 to 15 years old. They had a 6-week session, 2 lessons per week, and it was a physical education program. And the results were they had improved in shifting performance, and so they were just able to better on, that was the flanker test, which is very similar to the card sorting example that I had given earlier. The third one, 90 children, some normal weight and some that were overweight, 70 to 11 years old, and both physical activity and weight status showed relationships with aspects of cognitive functioning. Okay, so these are just, there's many more studies out there about executive functioning exercise. So we pretty much know there's a relationship. So, and that came up earlier. That was a question, well, if a horse is moving, because we consider the movement of the horse physical exercise. Research on children with ADHD. So there were boys, no control group, 8 years old to almost 14 years old, a very 5-minute vigorous exercise, and they had better response to inhibition. They had fewer errors on the go, no-go task. Another one was general sports lessons and coordinated exercise. There was no control group. Children 7 to 12 years old, 12-week session, 60 minutes of physical activity. They had improved verbal working memory. So research on executive functioning and EAAT. So we had a group of males, 28, 15, doing equine-assisted therapy, 13 in the control, 6 to 12 years old. They were verbal. They rode in small groups of 3 to 4 participants. The sessions lasted 60 to 70 minutes, 1 time per week for 6 months, okay? So they did things like grooming and everything. It specifically reduced planning time, okay, during a problem-solving task. So the second research on EAT and executive functioning, so children with autism, 50 in therapeutic horseback riding, 47 in the control group, 6 to 16 years old, verbal and nonverbal. They rode in small groups of 2 to 4 participants. Sessions lasted about 45 minutes, 1 time per week for 10 weeks. It included riding skills and horsemanship, so it would be ground skills. And they had improvements in self-regulation, okay? There was research, it was called Hoofbeats. This was on children with apraxia. There were 39. There was no control group, 6 to 15 years old. They rode for 6 weeks. The test improved nonverbal intelligence by 39%, okay, from baseline, so that's the before and after. Improvements in concentration and attention were reported by the parents. And it was supported by a valid and reliable assessment, the Child Depression Inventory, okay? So parents noted increasing in self-regulation throughout the study. The researchers believed that it was the rhythm of the horse that helped with the improvement in the nonverbal intelligence test, and it also improved motor ability. So this is the one I love because it's more of a physiological, and that's why I put it last, okay? So we're really looking at the brain here. It's not self-report by parents on, some behavioral changes. we're really looking at the brain on this one, and I know you can't read this one at all. So it was mostly boys and one girl. There was no control, but 6 to 13 years old, and they completed 12 weeks of equine-assisted activities, unmounted and a hippotherapy session, and they went twice per week. Okay, so twice per week for 12 weeks. The QEEG is the cap in the picture, okay, and is used to look at brain waves, okay. And so we're looking at the electric brain waves, and they were recorded during a go-no-go test. So we've already talked about the go-no-go test, and they did that for 5 minutes. So the beta waves, the brain waves for attention thinking, increased, okay. The brain waves for drowsiness and daydreaming decreased. So that was the theta waves. And so their conclusion was that the EAAT sessions positively affected the cerebral functioning of the children with ADHD. So, and you can see these are the 2 points that showed change. Okay, so the little red dots. Okay, so as we move forward and do research, the more physiological we can be, actually, putting an EEG cap on or putting something on a horse or whatever, really has more proof, than a parent report. I'm not saying don't do a parent report, but, this really shows significance in changing the brain.
We have a question in the back.
It was after the 6-week session, so they did a before and after the sessions.
Yeah, it's in the back of your
We have everything, we have a reference list, like 4 pages of references. This is also online, so you can go and look at this particular one. We can't read it either. Oh, here we go. It is Jang et al. 2015. I'm sorry, this is much clearer. Jang, Jang et al. 2015. So in the reference, there's a complete reference list at the end of your handout, and also this is also available online if you want to blow anything up. And look at it.
Can you answer, is it just that it's physical activity, or TR does something different than physical activity? Is it why?
Well, that's just it. That's just it. We don't know. We don't know. We're saying physical activity. That's why I made the argument that therapeutic riding is physical activity, and there's proof that physical activity changes executive functioning, can improve executive functioning. That's why it's significant to our field. Okay, so there is no research that proves that it is exactly therapeutic horseback riding. So the more we can do this, the more we can say it might be therapeutic horseback riding versus the physical activity.
So I was going to say, you could tease it out with like another physical activity that doesn't tap as much
Right.
into executive functioning.
Right.
Running.
Right. So there was no control group here. So if you have a control group, you have a better argument. This particular research, but this is the kind of research we need to do, but we need a control group. And then you have a better argument that says it was the therapeutic horseback riding that did it. Okay?
There is research to suggest that brains can change, be trained. And it sounds like what seems to go is that this particular activity helps to train that brain to be more effective.
Correct. So she said there is research out there that says that we can train the brain, right, to improve certain skills, especially executive functioning skills, okay, and that, yes. Okay. Are we finished with questions?
Maybe so. So I told you I was a brain nerd. I'm a horse movement junkie. I show horses, I go to horse shows, I have 28 horses at my home, and I watch the movement of the horse constantly. And in the future, what I really want to see fleshed out, and I'm working with Auburn University on one particular horse, and we've taken some initial analysis using a lameness exam. And I told them, I said, I need some data here. And they said, but it's, that doesn't correlate with what you do. And I said, yes, it does. It does. I need this. I need this piece. Is to look at the particular movement of a horse and horse selection and scientifically make a horse choice based on what that student needs. I know it inherently. Sometimes I make a good guess. Sometimes I trot first and use that really high displacement Arabian that I have. And, we get on and we're out of the block and we trot for 10 minutes first. That's the first thing that we do. But there is no scientific data to back that up. So in the future, I would love to partner with whoever is interested and try and get some baseline data on that horse movement piece too, so that the measurements are out there. We just need to marry the two. And the veterinary community has no clue that I'm looking for that at all, or they didn't when I came to it. Yes, there's a question in the back.
I'm curious about the fact that a horse is a living, breathing, sentient being. And when we were talking about exercise, whether it be biking or using a ball or swimming, that's a completely different type of exercise than when a person is interacting with a horse who is, again, alive, loving, sentient being. So and then in one of the earlier sessions, there was the concept of biophilia, the urge to be close to nature and living beings. So I would think that would be a huge.
I think that, okay, the question is it the movement of the horse? Is it that, or is it the fact that it is a living, breathing animal? And I think that we have to flesh out the movement first and then go to the living, breathing part of it. We do know that people are drawn to living, breathing animals. And so I think that we're going to have to get the movement piece first and then look at the biophysiological part of the horse, the animal, whatever that piece may be. But I think you're definitely correct in saying that, and that is my belief that, yes, it is part of the living being, but we also need to really have some good, strong data out there about that movement piece too, because I know that even on the best equicizer that I can't get that movement anywhere else in a clinical setting ever. I can't get it. So, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an occupational therapist.
Right.
I'm looking at it from doing more of an ecotherapy standpoint. I completely agree with you about not being able to replicate it. The replication is also, I think, with the brain stuff that we'll hopefully somebody will research and find is the amount of time and longevity of the stimulation of the vestibular system, of the brain, of the body, of the proprioceptive input, the vestibular system knowing where it is, to get that integration to promote executive functioning. I can't keep a child on a swing for 45 minutes. I can't keep a kid on a ball for 45 minutes. I can't stimulate that brain and that inner ear like I can on the equine because of the motivation that they have being on that animal. And I think that's something that hopefully with the research they'll find with the movement. It's like there's so many pieces to it that we haven't opened up yet.
Right. I totally agree. I'm not sure I can repeat all that for the benefit of the video, but yes, I totally agree with you on that as a therapist also and as a therapeutic riding instructor. So let's go to the next slide. So much needs to be fleshed out in this conversation. So in the practice, the inhibitory control, I look at runners And I think it's important to look at why they're running. What are they running towards something, or are they running away? And I think it's perfectly acceptable to let children run. If it's safe, let them go and see what happens. I see runners stopped over and over again, and I'm asking, why are you stopping that? What? They're not running into traffic. If they're not going to hurt themselves or someone else, let them run and understand what piece of communication you're getting from that. Most of my experience has been when I chase a runner, they run faster than me. And the older I get, the more they can outrun me. So I'm really not physically capable anymore of chasing the runner down and tackling them. And I've learned, because I'm getting limited in my physical ability, to wait and see what they're running to or running away from. And they generally come back. So that's my little piece on running. Yes. Yeah, it could just be input that I need to escape for a minute, or I just need to run or jump off this high ledge and get some deep compression input from that. So yes, I totally agree. The comment was made that they may just be getting some sensory input from that. So don't chase your runners always. Yeah, if it's safe. Working memory, talking a little bit about when they go into the tack room, forget what they have, attention, shifting, flexibility, horse changes, weather changes. And I think it's really important to bring to this to teach replacement behaviors when that piece is missing. So when they can't do the attention shifting, or when they need some help with their inhibitory control, teach them a way to have that. So these are like a what can I do chart, and you can make these up. We made these up from our own photographs of what can you do when you don't know what to do. You can apologize to your horse. Wait and cool off so that it then becomes a student-centered decision, and it's not just one more directive to give. It empowers the person who is having the difficulty. So I think teaching those replacement behaviors, waiting, and that's our next slide. Waiting is probably the thing that I see the most difficulty with. There is so much waiting embedded into our lives, and it is very difficult for these students to wait. So the EAT sessions that require that response to inhibition, they may have to do with the waiting piece of it. So waiting one's turn to play a game through an obstacle, what can they do while they're waiting? Okay, I can't wait. I don't have that ability to wait. So what can I do? And thinking about what they can do when it's the next turn, I think is a very important thing. You can't always assume that students know how to wait. They may not be able to wait on the block for the next person to come. They may need to have something to do while they're waiting. So, and that's where that whole shift comes, where their working memory disappears while they're waiting, that kind of thing. Next slide.
So one of the skills that we work on almost all the time in a writing lesson or with groundwork, with grooming the horse, it's all about memory. You know, knowing the order of the brushes, which brush comes first in grooming. So you put the saddle on first and then the bridle, okay? So here's an example of a obstacle course, okay? So remembering where to go. So this is where us as therapeutic riding instructors and also our sidewalkers and our leaders, they know where to go, and they just take the rider through the obstacle course. You don't know what their working memory is, okay? You don't know, okay? If you have an independent rider, then that's where we need to be quiet as the instructor to see if they remember, okay? And not give them too many clues. If they don't remember that they're supposed to go to the red barrel, you know, turn right and go to the red barrel, we can go stand by memory. Okay, so besides using our mouth, which might interfere with their processing, we can just go and stand by the next obstacle. That might be something you might want to consider. So we also have to think about, and we've talked a little bit about that level of executive functioning, how much memory does that child have, because we had a 3-step command earlier. Okay, so how many directions can you give, and then waiting for their response. So depending on their level of executive functioning, they can go from doing an obstacle course, which is an independent, a one-person activity, to then going to a higher engagement activity of memorization, okay? But it's also attention shifting, okay? Because first they're focused on their their horse and themselves, and then they have to do that shift set, that attention shifting. Oh, there's another rider, and I'm supposed to be across from them. Or, oh, there's another rider, we're doing, thread the needle, and oh my gosh, So they have to go back and forth. So if you've, done drill team yourself, you know that first you focus here, and then you focus there, and then you focus here, and then you focus there. Okay, and so this is a much higher engagement in what that looks like and how that is really helping somebody with their executive functioning, not just memory, okay? So if you want to work on the attention shifting part, you might be calling out the next movement, okay? If you're working on the memory part, then you might see how far they can go until everybody's jumbled up in the arena. Okay, so there's totally 2 different parts to a drill team when we're thinking about executive functioning. Okay. Where are you going to go do that? Is that you? No, that's me. Okay. So we had just talked about how they have to have shift set and flexibility within the drill team. Well, there's items that you can do around your barn, okay? So that organization that you have set up, you can ask them to totally change it, okay? So think about also self-correction. So if you have a rider go bring in the girth and it says 36 on it and they hang it on the 34, okay, give them a chance for self-correction, okay? And if they don't self-correct, you can ask, what's the length of that girth? What's the numbers on that girth? Because you have 34 right up there and 36 right there, okay, or whatever your numbers are, okay? And, not that you can't help them and give them prompts, but don't just do it for them and don't just give them, so think about, because that's flexibility and that, just awareness of their environment, okay? You can do something wrong. Yes, question.
Well, maybe a straight person for this, because you may already get to it, but take this to a little bit further extreme. We tack horses supposedly, or groom them in this progression because it's the right way, instead of it's the way we've always done it. Suppose you were to reverse that and say, okay, today we're going to start with picking the hooves.
You could.
We're going to go brush the tail.
Mm-hmm.
Then, reverse that. Is that an advisable or useful strategy?
It could. Yes, I think that reversing an order of the grooming. Okay, we do it in a certain order and we teach it in a certain order, but if you really want to help somebody with that rigidity and that, because somebody with autism is going to say, you can't do it that way, but then, you might have somebody else who says, oh, that might be kind of neat. And then they start at the bottom of the pictures and go up. Okay, and so you're teaching, I don't see why you couldn't use that, but you would definitely get a sense of their non-flexibility if they just say no versus, oh, let's try that.
Give the example of the
Might that be better done
Uh-huh.
after your client student has already mastered the usual
Right.
Yeah.
Right. 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 You wouldn't want to go back and forth every week. It would be more like, yeah. So you would want, the statement was, you would want them to complete it, mastered it correctly before trying something like that. I'll give you an example. Last week, we're in our pilot right now, and we're working with 6 children in a residential facility that have gone through extreme trauma. And so what we did is we put a different horse in a stall, because one of our words and one of what they're working on is awareness of their environment. Not one child noticed that the sorrel or chestnut, whichever your background is, horse had suddenly become a blue roan. Not one child. Not one. Okay. So that's what, when we talk about doing something novel, such as reversing something, changing something in your environment, you know, they couldn't shift set. They just assumed it was Sissy. They just assumed it was the right horse. And they just couldn't go there. That, oh. So, this was week 5. This was week 5. It's a 6-week pilot. So we finish up on Monday.
And this was the horse that they used
They love.
every week.
They love this horse.
And she suddenly changed color.
Right.
they
Nobody
didn't know.
noticed. One of their counselors that came with them asked, "Is that Sissy?" He wasn't even sure. But I think we've had the most growth from this one counselor on trusting the children, okay, in this environment. So, and that's something I'm real excited about, that we have one of the counselors that actually trusts this children in the environment. Because we talk about trust all the time. You know, can we let them be themselves in another environment? So, so do something novel, like put the wrong horse in the wrong stall, you know, consider that. And are they aware? And can they even, in their mind, see that it's a different horse? So, depending on their executive functioning skills.
I've also had my student teach the lesson before as an instructor and put them in the perspective of being in the middle of the arena, and I became the student in writing. There is a lot of growth that comes from that, from both perspectives. So I think that's an interesting concept to bring about too. So just think about that.
So one of the examples that we had on our sheet, and not necessarily there, was like in one of the tack buckets, just put all curry combs or put all hard brushes or do something so that you know, it's like, well, what do we do now? This problem solving. If you were out at Heavenly Hooves at the McCormick Research Center, you know, I was one of the mentors, and, you know, in the role play, and, you know, I thought the main tail was the curry comb, because we have some that look very similar, but then I asked the role play child, you know, well, can you bring the bucket over here, because I had the horse, could you bring the bucket over here and let's look for the curry comb? So, and there was no curry comb, okay, so sometimes, you know, you might just set up, we call it sabotaging the environment in early childhood. But that's a terrible term, but that's what it's called. And so, you know, there is no curry comb. What do we do? So where can we go look for one? So, and not just always, you know, have that sidewalker helper, leader, horse handler, whatever you call the people that handle the horses, go just automatically get the curry comb. So hopefully you can use some of this logic and reasoning and information in here to help educate your volunteers and yourself to better allow children to gain these executive functioning skills, give them time to work on their executive functioning skills. Question way in the back.
No, I have not.
So So the question was,
I do not know of any, and that is part of the problem of our industry. The question was, do you know of any research that compares interactive metronome with therapeutic writing? And you start trying to flesh out and find research on therapeutic writing, and it is so slim. And we don't even have really good studies out there yet. It is exciting to be a part of a new group of people who are very interested in research like we are, and having some good, great, credible research studies out there. So no, and it is so difficult to find any measures, whether good, bad, or otherwise. It's just not done very often, and I think it's part of our industry difficulty that we're operating on such a budget all the time that who has time to actually make that happen? And that's one of the reasons I'm very passionate about working for the University of Alabama's research is part of their huge component. It's on every sign that you see there, research, research, research. So I definitely think that there's a huge growth for that. Yes.
I'm just curious, as a group collecting the data, the notes about our students' progression, and the big conversation about the language that we're using and trying to be more universal. From your perspective as instructors, what can we do to become more comprehensible for putting these things together and making some observations collectively is just so broad, I mean, in general, and especially in this, with executive function. And one of the things, as well is there's a high, motivational aspect going along with movement. Was that because the person is highly motivated, or were they stimulated, or was the deep brain stimulated? I know, I'm just thinking, what words could I better use to make this more measurable?
Okay, one thing that we can always do is we can make it more quantitative than qualitative. How many cues did it take to execute a one-step movement? So that is something that is missing in our piece a lot of time when I'm reading therapeutic writing notes. And when I'm reading what they're measuring, they're saying a child has mastered a skill when it takes 4 cues to get them to post on the correct diagonal. That is not mastery if you have 4 cues. So when we write notes, then we need to be sure how many cues we're giving to execute that specific skill. So that answers the first part of your question, is making sure that what we're measuring is quantitative, that we know what we're measuring and we're breaking it down into small pieces over a period of time, and we know what kind of cues we're giving to that student for them to be successful in the task.
And when you say cues, is a replacement word for that a prompt?
Prompt, yes, yes,
And we're talking verbal, physical, and visual prompts, right?
yes.
like
So,
if you went and stood by the barrel, like I gave an example, then you would write that in your notes. They remembered when I went to the barrel, but you gave a physical prompt. You went by the barrel. But if you don't have that in your notes, then you can't see the reduction in prompts to see that their memory is improving.
so if they're constantly being prompted, like let's go back to the example of Colton calling his grandmother. If I had to call him every Thursday to tell him to call his grandmother, he's on maximum prompts. But the fact that he can set his own phone, he's prompting himself through that skill at that point. So that's a little bit different than there having to be a different person there. If
So
that
that
makes
would be more self-monitoring. He can do it himself versus somebody else.
And I'm guessing the distance between your prompts would also have to be timed.
Yes, distance between your prompts, the amount of prompts, and you need to do prompting, you need to measure that over a period of time. One time of not prompting is not enough time. So you need to have very successful, and know how many times you're measuring that. Are you doing it 5 times? Does that mean mastery?
But am I giving them a crutch by doing that?
No, that's the whole thinking in pictures debate that Temple Grandin has brought to the table in our industry of learning by picturing what is going on. So no, giving people pictures, I have sticky notes all over my house. All of us use a lot of visual memory to prompt that, and it's a very non-invasive way that doesn't interfere. There's very little interference with a visual prompt versus a verbal prompt.
Even if it's like a live, like say I walk the obstacle first.
Right.
So, but as you're walking, you usually put visual and verbal together. You don't just walk it, you walk it and talk it. And then you take the visual prompt away, and then they can go from the verbal. Like when we're walking in front of the horse, turn right, turn left. We have visual and verbal together. And then pretty soon, they have the picture in their mind.
Our time's up.
Our picture and just use the words. Oh, I'm sorry, I wasn't as.
Yeah.
Important is the consistency of that prompt.
I don't think it's important at all. As a matter of fact, I like the prompts to change.
Right.
I love prompting to change all the time because when you build up that consistency, then you take away a piece of it. So our world changes on a daily basis, so prompting needs to change too.
It's almost like sight reading. People who learn how to sight read, they're not actually learning necessarily how to read the word, right? They're recognizing patterns
Right.
to fill it in.
Right, that's why they teach phonics and sight together now, because they tried phonics and they tried sight and they didn't work independently. So now we teach phonics and sight together, and that's how children read now, learn to read.
Yes.
When I asked these questions, sort of part of it is that we change instructors. Our students will sometimes get different instructors, and part of our philosophy is every instructor has a style. Somebody has a little more, he's a little louder, a little more verbal, somebody else is quieter. And I wondered if that fit in, when you are trying to teach a measurable goal or whatever, that
Yeah, the comment was changing instructors, and does that help the student or does that make it harder? Initially, it would make it much more difficult. Then you can start introducing different horses, different instructors. I also work with our team, and they're the highest level riders that I've ever worked with in my life. Why are they such good riders? We have 32 horses. They come in every day and they pull a different horse out every day and ride it. So, yeah, the same kind of general principle comes on because they don't get to ride the same horse every day. They're high-level riders because they get on a different horse every time they ride.
But
Your
Yeah,
measurement will change.
But one might use more prompts and one might not use as many prompts, but what's the same is how you write your progress notes. And if you say you must write your prompts, that doesn't have anything to do with style, because we all are different. But how you write those progress notes and how you can rationalize, use some of this information to say this is why you need to allow the child to show you their memory or show you that they're flexible. And your sidewalkers and leaders need to be trained too around how to better work around executive functioning.
We're way out of time.
Yeah, we're way out of time. So thank you very much. Those were great questions.
There's a lot of references here. People were asking about our references, so.
Yeah, so all the references are in the back.